class, I have already explained the introductory concepts about the biochemistry, why the biochemistry is important, and what is the biochemistry. We have already said that it is both life science as well as the chemical science, and it explains the root cause of the disease, and it also explains about how the various biochemical pathways are regulated, and the how the molecules metabolize, and so on. And so this biochemistry has various subspecialties we have already explained, and we have already seen that the biochemistry is very important to understand the medicine. This point also we have highlighted in the last class. Then I have highlighted the historical account of the biochemistry. Then coming to, in order to understand the biochemistry, we can directly explain the proteins, lipids, and the nucleic acids and the metabolism, but it is advisable to go through the certain foundations of the biochemistry. Whatever we will be studying in this module, the overview of the what you are going to study in the later. So you can we give the heading, that is the module 1, foundations of biochemistry. And before we have, in this module we will be studying the various foundations of the biochemistry, that is the cellular, chemical, physical, genetic and evolutionary foundations. Before going to explain the all these cellular, chemical, physical and genetic and evolutionary foundations, let me give you a brief overview of what are the characteristic features of the living organisms. And before that, let me give what is the uh, origin of life on the earth. And we know that the there are many theories have been proposed to explain the origin of life on earth, and but it is believed that around 14 billion years ago the universe came into the existence because of the cataclysmic explosion of hot energy rich subatomic particles. And because of this explosion, initially the simple elements were formed like hydrogen and the helium. And as the universe expanded and cooled, the material condensed and the under the influence of the gravity, and initially formed the various stars, and some stars became enormous and exploded, and releasing the energy, and this energy facilitated the formation of the more complex molecules, complex elements from the simple atomic nuclei. And then these atoms and the molecules further formed the masses of dust particles, and accumulation of these eventually lead to the formation of various rocks, planetoids and the planet. So this is the overview. And coming to the origin of life, the origin of life, first the life came onto the earth around 4 billion years ago. Initially the simple microorganisms, so in the sense they have the ability to extract energy from the chemical compounds, were formed first. Later the multicellular organisms are developed. So here you can see that the formation of earth took place about 4.5 billion years ago. And then there are several attempts have been made time to time to explain the origin of life on earth. And so there many theories have been proposed to explain the possible mechanism of origin of life. And these are the theory of special creation, theory of spontaneous generation, theory of biogenesis, theory of biochemical evolution, theory of panspermia, deep sea hydrothermal vent theory. And all these are only the theories, we are not going to explain the detail. So in the sense, continuation with this topic, I just wanted to say that many people have given different explanations for the origin of life on the earth. So we know, according to the theory of special creation, so according to this theory, different forms of life created by God, and it has no scientific basis. And coming to the theory of spontaneous generation, according to theory of spontaneous generation, all living creatures formed from the non-living matter, and according to the theory of biogenesis, new living things are formed from the pre-existing life. And according to the theory of biochemical evolution, the life first came from a collection of various chemical molecules with a by a series of reactions. That is the biochemical evolution. And of course, the theory of panspermia. According to this, life had come to the earth from the different planets, and deep sea hydrothermal vent theory says that the life originated near the deep sea hydrothermal vent. So these are all different attempts that have been made to explain the origin of life on earth. And biochemistry asks how the remarkable properties of living organisms arise from the thousands of different lifeless biological macromolecules. So hence we need to understand what are the distinguishing features of living organisms compared to the non-living matter. And we know living organisms have certain features, and these features are, one is they are they have the high degree of chemical complexity and microscopic organization, and they have the systems for extracting, transforming, and using energy from the environment. And living organisms have the different components, and each components have different defined functions. And living organisms have various mechanisms for sensing and responding to the changes in the surroundings, and they have the ability for the self-replication and self-assembly, and they have the ability to evolve with the time. So all these are the characteristic features of the living organisms. And let us see one by one. So first, that the all living organisms have a high degree of chemical complexity and microscopic organization. We know that all living organisms are highly complicated and they are highly organized. In the sense, if you take any cell, and the cell, the cell has many thousands of different biological macromolecules. These biological macromolecules make up the various cell internal structures. And these macromolecules, mainly DNA, proteins, and other sugar polymers, they are long polymers, and they have the characteristic sequence, and also they have the unique three-dimensional or 3D structure or the conformation. And because of their characteristic sequence and the unique three-dimensional conformation, they are highly specific in interacting with the binding other binding partners in the cell. So that means what you are seeing, if you take any cell, the cell has the many thousands of different biological macromolecules, and in order to make the cells enter various internal structures. That's why the living organisms have the high degree of chemical complexity and microscopic organization. And second one is they have the systems for extracting, transforming, and using energy from the environment. This is we know that all living organisms have the ability to extract and transform the energy. And we know that these systems are useful for the organisms to build and maintain their intricate structures, and also to do various mechanical, chemical, osmotic, and electrical work. For example, the movement of molecules from the across the membrane, or the biosynthesis, or the light emission, and so on. So that means all living organisms have certain some systems. They can transform, extract energy from the environment, and transform and utilize for various biological needs. So we know that the ultimate source of energy is the sun. The ultimate source of energy is the sun, and the energy flows from the sun to photosynthetic. So what you are seeing here is the photosynthetic organisms. From the photosynthetic organisms, it goes to the herbivores. From herbivores, it goes to the carnivores, and carnivores these carnivores capture the some amount of energy that is coming from the sun through the the through the producers and the herbivores, and the finally to the carnivores, and synthesize. These carnivores can synthesize high energy molecules like ATP and NADPH and other high energy molecules. And this ATP, NADH, you have already studied. They are the high energy molecules, and they drive many unfavorable processes in the cell. And also this ATP and NADH and other high energy molecules are required for the biosynthesis and the movement of molecules, and the osmotic work against the concentration gradient, and so on. So that means these living organisms have some systems to transform energy, extract energy from the environment, and transform and utilize for doing various work, such as either mechanical, or the chemical, osmotic, or electrical, and so on. So that means all living organisms have the systems for extracting, transforming, and using energy from the environment. And now, coming to the third important feature is that all living organisms have different different components for different functions. So that means each component has its own function. So these components could be either macroscopic structures, such as leaves and stem, or the heart and lungs, or the microscopic structures such as nucleus, biological molecules, or the other individual compounds such as enzymes, or the metabolic intermediates. So all these, they either macroscopic or the microscopic structures, they have the particular function, and they interact with each other. And if there is any change in the one component, that causes the change in other as well. Because as I already said, that the living organisms are highly complex. They have the many molecules, and so if there is any change in one component, that brings change in the other component as well. So this is about so that means all the living organisms have various components, and they have the different functions. And next, all the living organisms have the various mechanisms for sensing and responding to alterations in their surroundings. So this is true that so the living organisms have the various mechanisms to respond, and also to adapt to the environment. For example, the well-known example, we know that when the bacteria when the under extreme conditions, the bacteria can sporulate. In the sense of formation of the spores is one example. In the sense, and under unusual condition, the bacteria forms the endospores, and again when the suitable under suitable conditions, again this spore again forms the new bacteria. That is a different story. That means so these all these organisms have the ability the sensing the changes in the surroundings and also to adapt to the environment. So this is the fourth one. And last one is all the living organisms have the capacity for precise self-replication and self-assembly. So this we know that all living organisms reproduce themselves by a variety of mechanisms. For example, in case of bacteria, that is a simple division, and whereas in case of plants and animals, mainly the sexual reproduction, they reproduce the identical copies, and these identical copies are the fidelity of the is mainly because of the replication. And we know that the living organisms the DNA is present in the nucleus, and it has the genetic information, and during cell division the DNA also the undergoes replication. And we know that the DNA has the two strands, and these two strands are held together. And when the during the DNA replication it copies as it is from as it is without any the mistake. So that means the all the living organisms have a capacity to self replicate and so on. But this self replication is not lack in case of inanimate world, that is the non living matter. And last one is all the living organisms have the capacity to undergo change over time by the gradual evolution. So that is only the living organisms only can change with the time in order to survive during the evolution. So these are the characteristic features of the living organisms. In the sense they have the various systems the to extract and transform energy. They have the high degree of chemical complexity, and different components have different functions in the living organisms, and they have various mechanisms for sensing and responding to the alter changes in the surroundings. They have the ability to self-replicate and self-assembly, and they also have the ability to evolve with the time. So these are the characteristic features of living organisms. And so coming to understand the biochemistry, as I already said that it is essential to understand this background information, that is various foundations, that is a cellular foundation and the chemical foundation, physical foundation, genetic foundation, and evolutionary foundation. So we will see in this class the cellular foundation and the chemical foundation and the physical foundation and the genetic foundation will be discussed in the afternoon class. So we know that all living organisms are made up of with different cells. So that means they all living organisms are composed of different cells, and that means cell is the structural and functional unit of all organisms. And based on the number of cells present, these organisms are classified into unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms, they they have only one cell, single cell, whereas the multicellular organisms are composed of more than one cell. And we know that multicellular organisms, they have, since they have the more than one cell, and all these cells are different types, and they have the different size, different shape, and also different function. But whereas in case of unicellular organisms, only single cell is present, the entire the activity is carried out by the single cell. We know the unicellular organisms like the amoeba, paramecium, and euglena, all these are unicellular organisms. They have only the single cell, and the entire activity is carried out by the single cell. So in multicellular organisms, they have different cells, and the different cells have different functions as well, and as well. So if you see the basic difference between the unicellular and the multicellular organisms, in unicellular organisms, as I said, that they are composed of made up of with a single cell, whereas in a multicellular organism they have the numerous different with several cells. And in unicellular organisms, in unicellular organisms, and the it is, since it has only single cell, it can only do all the metabolic activities in order to survive, whereas in multicellular organisms, different cells have the different cells can perform different functions. And in unicellular organisms, since they have only the one cell, and the body is the cell body is exposed to the environment, all the sites, whereas in the multicellular organisms, only the outer cells are exposed to the environment. And in case of unicellular organisms, if there is any injury to the cell, that causes the death of the organism, whereas in case of multicellular organisms, if there is any injury or the injury to the one cell, it will not affect the organism, because it can be replaced with a new cell. And in case of unicellular organisms, the activity is carried out by the single cell. That's why the unicellular organisms have very short lifespan, and because of the heavy load of the work, and carried out by the single cell, whereas the multicellular organisms have a longer lifespan, because the work is divided among different cell types. And we know that these are all bacteria, amoeba, or all these are the unicellular, and the humans, plants, and animals, and these are the multicellular organisms. And so this is about the basic difference between the unicellular and the multicellular organisms. So that means all the organisms are composed of the cells, and it is the structural and the functional unit of the living organism, and based on the number of cells present in the organism, they are divided into unicellular and the multicellular, and we have seen the basic difference. So now coming to the so since all the living organisms are built with the cell, and cell is the structural and the functional unit of the life, and all cells have some structural features, and these are presence of the plasma membrane and the cytoplasm, as well as the nucleus in case of eukaryotes, and the nucleoid in case of prokaryotes. So as you can also see here, this is the plasma membrane, and this is the nucleus, and this is the cytoplasm. We know the plasma membrane, we know that this is the membrane that is present around the cell, and this plasma membrane is made up of with the lipids as well as the proteins, and it is made up of with lipids as well as the proteins. And this plasma membrane, let me draw the bigger diagram, and it is the lipid bilayer, and the main function of the plasma membrane is only to protect the cell from the surrounding, and it also separate the cytoplasm from the surrounding. And since it is a lipid bilayer, it allows only the very few molecules from inside to outside, or the outside to inside. So that means it acts as a selective barrier, because it allows only the specific molecules, and the various proteins present on the plasma membrane. They are either integral proteins or the peripheral proteins. These proteins can act as a transporting, these proteins have various functions, either transporting molecules or the ions, are acting as a receptors on the membrane, and are in some case, in case of electron transport chain in inner mitochondrial membrane, there are many the electron transport proteins are present, so they have the various functions in the electron transport chain as well. So therefore, the plasma membrane that is present on the cell is a barrier. It separates the cytoplasm from the surroundings. It gives the shape to the cell, and it also regulates the cellular volume. And since it is the lipid bilayer, and it doesn't allow the polar molecules to go in or to go out, only hydrophobic molecules can easily cross, and only gaseous molecules can easily cross, whereas the other polar molecules cannot easily cross. In order to transport these such polar molecules, the plasma membrane has various intrinsic as well as the extrinsic proteins. These intrinsic and extrinsic proteins act as either transporters or the receptors on the membrane, and and so on. So this is about the plasma membrane that is present on the membrane. So it is present either in both in prokaryotes as well as in the eukaryotes. So the membrane you can also see here. Second one is the cytoplasm. So cytoplasm, that is the liquid portion present in the cell, and we know that the cytoplasm has many subcellular organelles like mitochondria, lysosomes, chloroplasts, endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, and so on. In addition to this, the cytoplasm, that is the liquid portion that is present in the cell, has many molecules such as enzymes, RNA, amino acids, and nucleotides, and many organic molecules such as metabolites, coenzymes, inorganic ions such as sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and so on. So the cytoplasm has many. It is aqueous solution, but it has many subcellular organelles, many the organic and inorganic molecules, enzymes, and so on, in order to catalyze most of the metabolic reactions. And this is about the cytoplasm. Coming to the nucleus. So in case of eukaryotes, nucleus is present, whereas in case of prokaryotes, nucleoid, in the sense the nuclear membrane is not present. So the nucleus is the house for the genome, that is the DNA present in the inside, and this genome has the information that is required for the cell survival. And as I already said, that the genome has the ability to replicate and so on, whereas the nucleoid is present only in a bacteria, and the sense it is not separated from the cytoplasm and by the membrane. So therefore in prokaryotes, nucleoid the is present. And coming to the, and of course since eukaryotic cell has the many subcellular organelles, and each subcellular organelle has a different function, and we have already, I think you must have already studied even in the cell biology, the nucleus has the DNA, and the nucleolus makes the ribosomes, and mitochondria is mainly involved in the electron transport chain, that is the formation of ATP from the high energy reducing equivalents NADH. So that's why the mitochondria is the called storehouse of the energy. And the chloroplast, we know that it is involved in the photosynthesis, that is the conversion of sunlight into the sugar, and the ribosomes involved in the protein synthesis. Endoplasmic reticulum also involved in the protein synthesis as well as the passage of the protein. Golgi bodies involved in the packing the synthesized proteins, and also for the secretion. And lysosomes involved in the lysosomes have various enzymes to break down the molecules, and cell wall protects and supports the cell membrane, as I already said, that regulates the movement of the molecules and ions across the membrane, and it allows only the particular molecule to go in or to go out. That is very important in order to maintain the cell volume and the membrane potential also. And vacuole has the storage function. Cytoplasm has the fluid that holds various organelles, and flagella, in case of certain the multicellular organisms have flagella, and they have the movement and pili, and it is mainly in the bacteria. It is mainly used in the attaching to the other cells, and of course a capsule, and it protects the bacteria and so on. And DNA is the genetic material. So that means different subcellular organelles have different uh, uh, functions and so on. And coming to the cellular dimensions of cell, we know that the most of the cells are microscopic and invisible to the unaided eye. So in the sense, for example, animal and plant cells have 5 to 10 micrometers size, whereas unicellular organisms, mainly the bacteria, has 1 to 2 micrometers size. And what exactly dictates its cell size? So the cell size, the lower limit is dictated by the minimum number of biomolecules required by the cell. So required by the cell. For example, if you take mycoplasma, it has 300 nanometers diameter, and if it is and with a volume of 10 to the power minus 4 ml, and if it is ribosome, 200 nanometers. And the upper limit is dictated depends on the rate of diffusion of solute molecules, that is solute molecules. And uh, and also in case of bacteria, the size is very small, but it has a high surface to volume ratio. And so so coming to this is about the sun. And coming to these living organisms are classified into three groups, that is the bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And the bacteria inhabit in the soil, surface water, living tissues, and also whereas the archaea can survive, can live only in the extreme conditions like salt lakes, hot springs, and ocean depths. We will explain later why the archaea is able to survive under extreme condition, because the archaeal membrane lipids have the ether linked bonds instead of ester linked bonds. So in lipids, so when the fatty acid is esterified with the alcohol, there is a ester bond. So the both eukaryotes and bacteria has the ester linked phospholipids, whereas the archaea has the ether linked phospholipids. And the ether linkage is highly resistant to the extreme conditions such as pH as well as the temperature. So that's why the archaea is able to survive under extreme conditions such as high temperature, the salt condition, and so on. And so these three categories are bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. And these bacteria and archaea are again depending upon their the O2 requirement. They are again they classified into aerobic and anaerobic. And in aerobic, these organisms can get the energy by using the oxygen as the terminal electron acceptor. As I already said that the NADH that is produced in the glycolysis and the TCA cycle is mainly converted into the ATP by the electron transport chain. That is the final process that takes place in the inner mitochondrial membrane. And in the inner mitochondrial membrane, during this process, the oxygen is used as a terminal electron acceptor. So therefore, in aerobic organisms, they survive only they need oxygen in order to survive. Whereas the anaerobic organism, these organisms get the derive energy by electron transfer other than using oxygen as the terminal electron acceptor. They use nitrate, sulfate, and other systems to get the energy. And these anaerobic organisms are again subclassified into obligate anaerobes and the facultative anaerobes. The obligate anaerobes can they are also called as a strict anaerobes, in the sense they cannot survive in the or the oxygen in the presence of oxygen. whereas the facultative anaerobes, they can able to survive in the presence or the in the absence with or without the oxygen. So so coming to the classification of prokaryotes based on their carbon and energy source based on their habitats, they are aerobic and the anaerobic. Aerobic organisms use oxygen as the electron acceptor. Anaerobic organisms use other than oxygen as the electron acceptor to derive the energy. And based on the carbon and energy source, these prokaryotes are also classified into phototrophs and chemotrophs. Phototrophs get energy from the light, whereas the chemotrophs get energy from the oxidation of the chemical molecules. And these phototrophs are further classified into autotrophs and heterotrophs based on the carbon source. Autotrophs use carbon dioxide as the carbon source, whereas the heterotrophs use carbon and carbon from the other organic compound. That means they use the organic compounds as the carbon source, whereas the autotrophs use only the carbon dioxide for as the carbon source. So we know for autotrophs, cyanobacteria, all these are the autotrophs, whereas the for heterotrophs, purple bacteria, green bacteria, these are all heterotrophs. So coming to the chemotrophs, these chemotrophs derive energy by the oxidation of chemical fuels, and these chemotrophs are again further classified into chemolithotrophs, chemoorganotrophs. In chemolithotrophs they use inorganic fuels, whereas the chemoorganotrophs use organic fuels. So, for example, sulfur bacteria, hydrogen bacteria, all these are the chemo examples for the chemolithotrophs, and whereas the chemo the organotrophs example is the most of the bacteria and so on and all so on. So this is about the classification of the prokaryotes depending upon their habitats and also depending upon their carbon and energy source is required. So so this is about the today's class. We will continue in the afternoon about the detailed structure of the bacteria as well as the eukaryotic cell.